Well, Minister, a few weeks ago we had a very sobering count of our national debt from the Chief Executive of the National Treasury and Management Agency, Mr Conor O'Kelly, and his Head of Funding, Mr Frank O'Connor, at the Budgetary Strategy Committee. And they answered concerns that have been put to me about the refinancing of our debt, particularly in late 2019, early 2020, when, as they say themselves, these chimney stacks of debt will have to be refinanced. And I've just asked you today if you're happy with the strategy of the NTMA, if you think, in fact, that perhaps should they not be lending for longer at the really low rates we have at the moment. In other words, is it a strategy that finance is happy with? Thanks, Cahill.
Thank you very much, Deputy, for your question. The Department of Finance is in regular contact with officials of the NTMA on a wide range of topics, including the management of the national debt. Over the period 2018 to 2020, there are 5 benchmark bonds due to mature. The total balance outstanding on these bonds is currently just over €42 billion. In addition, the majority of the bilateral loans received from the UK, Sweden and Denmark as part of the EU IMF programme also mature during that period. This brings the total long-term debt refinancing requirements over that 3-year period to approximately €46.5 billion. The Deputy should be aware that although there are 2 loans from the EFSM totalling €3.9 billion, with contractual maturity dates in 2018, these are due to be refinanced by the ESM in light of the maturity extensions granted to the EFSM and the EFSF loans in 2013. It is not expected that Ireland will have to refinance EFSM loans before 2027. The 5 benchmark bonds maturing over 2018 to 2020 carry annual coupons ranging from 4.4% to 5.9%. Based on the current interest rate outlook, the expectation is that these bonds can be refinanced at lower coupons. The current interest expenditure forecast reflects this expectation. From 2018 to 2020, refinancing requirements has already been significantly reduced in recent years. Following the early repayment to the IMF of December 2014 and Q1 of 2015, and the replacement with cheaper long-term market-based funding, the liability to the IMF in that 3-year period has been reduced by approximately €11.5 billion. The maturity extensions granted to EFSF and EFSM loans in 2013 and bilateral bond switching have also helped to reduce the refinancing requirements over that period by over €7 billion. The NTMA has also built up significant cash balances as part of its pre-funding strategy. These are expected to be the order of €10 billion at year-end. That's the end of 2017. These transactions leave the Exchequer in a healthy position to fund the 2018 to 2020 refinancing requirement.
Minister, but is it really a healthy position? I mean, your references to the ESM and the EFSF loans, are they not really irrelevant at this stage, given that we were allowed to refinance at face value rather than the MPV? But isn't the reality that, Minister, over 34% of our marketable debt requires refinancing in a very tight period of June 2019 to October 2020? In addition, I'm informed there's a requirement on the Central Bank to dispose of the FRN instruments acquired on the nationalisation of Anglo-Irish, which will accelerate from €500 million per annum to €1 billion per annum by 2019. And those repurchases have been made by NTMA, and the stock cancel at prices up to and above 150% of the nominal value. But the key point is these contracted repurchases add significantly to the amount of debt requiring refinancing in a highly concentrated timescale, and the percentage requiring refinancing has been lowered to a tiny extent over the last year. Indeed, it's fair to say, by NTMA's execution on request by market makers of switches. But they seem to be acting always, Minister, reactively and not proactively. So hasn't the NTMA sheltered, in effect, behind the belief that lower coupons on maturing debt is the same or as having efficient debt management in the start? I mean, they've watched 10-year yields more than treble from 0.3% to over 0.9% over the last 6 months, while 30 30-year yields have risen from 1.3% to 2%, and effectively they've done nothing to take advantage of that. Isn't there a possibility, Minister, that we'll face a perfect storm if Brexit goes badly wrong, we don't have a free trade area and so on, and other things are happening to the country in late 2019? It'll be an issue for your successor probably after the general election, but nonetheless it'll be a great issue for our country.
Minister, 1 minute, please.
Yeah, I'd be quite sanguine about the NTMA's policy. I discuss the situation with the NTMA quite frequently, and as you know, one of the strategies of the NTMA is to smooth the profile of debt repayments so that the peaks are reduced and as a consequence the values are increased, if you think of it in graph terms. And doing that very successfully. They've managed very well over the recent years. Our national debt is still very high. Obviously the size of the debt is a matter for concern, but I'm assured they don't expect any difficulty whatsoever in refinancing the debt that comes due in the 3 years you have raised in your question, and they also expect to do it at much lower interest rates or at a lower coupon, as use the term that they use.
Comparing, hope for refinancing costs with the historic coupons, on bonds sold indeed when Ireland was already entered into the crisis, and then hoping that they're still lower in 2 or 3 years' time. That's really not a strategy, Minister, and that's the core point that I'm just asking you today. Is it the stated strategy of NTMA, or the belief that long-term rates are unlikely to raise above current levels by the crucial period of June 2019 to October 2020? So we have to ask, Minister, why NTMA, and I have to say that Dr O'Kelly and his colleague, they gave us detailed information at the Budgetary Committee about the efforts they have made this year and last year, and especially since 2015, to refinance, the outstanding debt. But this is a vast amount of debt overhanging our country. Do we not need to have a much more proactive policy from NTMA? Are we just hoping that when quantitative easing, which ends in December, I think, that when quantitative easing, that the whole debt or the concerns about the debt will be effectively inflated away? So isn't it a possibility that you're leaving your successor in late 2019-2020 with possibly another very serious economic and therefore debt and therefore fiscal problem? Thanks, Cavan.
Response, Minister.
The NTMA tell me that there are a number of variables that impact on interest rates, including yields in other markets at the time, the demand for the relevant maturity at a point in time, the economic and fiscal position of the borrower, credit ratings and the size of issues and so on. The NTMA does not disclose the interest rates at which it could potentially issue debt, as to do so could negatively impact the agency from raising funds for the Exchequer at the most competitive rates possible. As I said in my response, the 5 benchmark bonds maturing over the 2018 to 2020 period carry annual coupons ranging from 4.4% to 5.9%, and the current expectation of the NTMA is that these bonds can be refinanced at lower coupons. But the kind of anxiety expressed by the Deputy, the NTMA do not share it, and they think that they're in a very strong position to refinance the debt in question at a lower interest rate than what prevails at present.
So we move now on to question number 41. 30 seconds to Deputy Michael McGrath to introduce.